Hello and welcome back, sleepywhatsit here, and I have another miniatures video for you. In today's video, we're going to be finishing my series of tutorials for Games Workshop's easy build models and paint sets. Specifically, we're going to be covering the Stormcast Eternals and Paint Set. If you're not familiar with these kits, they contain a number of easy build, push-fit models, some paints, and a starter brush to help you get going in the hobby. They are intended for beginners that don't have much experience in supplies that want to try painting some miniatures. I personally don't think that the minimal instructions that are provided with these kits is sufficient for a beginner, so I decided to make a series of walkthroughs for each of the kits to show new hobbyists how to use them. I have previously covered their Primus Intercessor, Death Guard, and Nighthaunt kits. I'll put a link to those videos down below in the description. I've also produced an overview/review video for this entire series of kits, which I'll put a card up now for it, and the link down below also. The overall format that this video will follow is going to be similar to the previous ones in the series, where we're going to do a brief overview of what comes in the box, and then do a walkthrough of how to paint one of the models. If you already have some elements of the kit, like the paints or your own brush or the models, then it's probably not worthwhile to buy the entire kit. Instead, it'd probably be cheaper for you to just purchase the missing elements separately. Before we get into things, I'll briefly introduce to you, or at least remind you, of the markers that I use in these videos. I place these at points where if you're actively following along and painting, that you should pause the video and go complete the step that I just described. They look something like this. I will put timestamps in the description below so that you can easily jump between the steps in the painting process if you need to review them later. So now let's get into it. So here we have the kit. Taking a look under the flap here, you can see the limited instructions that I mentioned before. If you're familiar with miniature painting, you probably can figure out what was intended by them, but if you're a new painter, they're a bit cryptic and honestly sparse. Let's open up the box and see what comes in it. First, we have two plastic frames called sprues that contain our three Stormcast Eternal Sequitors and their bases that we're going to be building and painting with this kit. Next, we have the starter brush that was provided. This isn't the greatest brush in the world, but it's serviceable for this and other beginner projects and is kind of an all-arounder. Now on to the paint that we've been provided with. The first paint that we have here is Retributor Armour, which is a bright gold metallic paint, which is going to be the undercoat for the entire model and all of the metallic bits on like the armor and shields and such. Here we have Rhinox Hide, which is a deep brown with a touch of red tone to it. This paint is primarily used for coloring the base differently from the rest of the model, but also can be used for a dark leather and things like that. This is Abbadon Black, which is a standard matte black paint that is a workhorse for a lot of miniature painters. On these models, it's going to be primarily used to darken the joints of the model and do some of the details like the belts and such. Next, we have Kantor Blue, which is a dark blue that we're going to be using to paint all of the contrasting blue portions of the armor on these models. Here we have Rakarth Flesh, which is a pale gray skin tone color that's going to be used for painting various fabrics on the models. Additionally, it's the only skin tone that we're provided with, so if you build the Sequitor Prime with the exposed head, then this is probably the skin tone color that you're going to be using there. Finally, we have our shade, Reikland Fleshshade, which comes in a slightly smaller pot than the normal store size, but in keeping with the rest of the kit. This is a kind of reddy brown that's really good for giving some definition to skin tones and things like that. There are a number of tools and supplies that are not provided in this kit that I think are essential for actually assembling and painting the models. I have previously made a separate video for the original Intercessor tutorial that covers all of these extra supplies I think you need. Instead of padding out this video by repeating myself, I'm going to put a card up here and a link down in the description below so you can go watch that video if you're not familiar with what more you need for this kit. This video covers assembly of push-fit models and can be broadly applied to assembling the models from this kit. The only major difference is, instead of having a tab model that goes into a slotted base, we have in this kit bases that use a push-fit system similar to the models themselves for attaching. I'm going to include a short time-lapse here of me building one of the Sequitors so that you can see how I tackled these specific models. Often with models like this that have a shield, it's easier to paint them with the shields attached so that you can access all the details. Especially for the model that has their shield on the ground, I would recommend painting that separately from the rest of the figure because it makes it very difficult to access some of the areas if it's attached to the model. If you need to, I would recommend pausing this video right now and reviewing the one that I linked before and assembling your own model, since I'm going to be proceeding assuming that you have an assembled model to work with. So here we have our prepped and assembled Sequitor model, which we're going to be painting. The first stage that we're going to be doing is base coating the entire model with Retributor Armour to establish an undercoat for the entire model. Retributor Armour is not a primer, it's just a base paint, so I would have preferred to prime the model beforehand to make sure the paint doesn't rub off later, but this kit doesn't come in with any primer. If you do have primer, I would highly recommend applying it before doing this layer of painting. Metallic paints like Retributor Armour are slightly translucent, so are normally affected by the underlying color. Since the plastic here is a light gray, we should end up with a slightly brighter gold color than we would have if we had like a black undercoat. I'm going to discuss at the end of this video a bit more about how we could undercoat our metallics differently for different effects. As you can see here, I either didn't shake my paint well enough or thinned it out too much, so instead of getting a nice layer of metallic paint down, I've gone something more like a yellow tint going on. Now here you can see the contrast between what a properly thinned metallic looks like and what I was originally putting down. You're going to want to cover the entire model and then let it dry. It is fine if at this stage there's some gray plastic still kind of showing through in high points and things like that. Now you can pause the video and apply your first coat of Retributor Armour to the model. So here we have our model with the first layer of Retributor Armour applied to it and dried. If we have our base coat thin enough that we have a good smooth application, then likely there's going to be gray spots in the paint job where the plastic is showing through a little bit. So we're now going to be applying a second coat, paying close attention to those gray patches, making sure that they get covered at this time. You should now pause the video and go apply your second layer of Retributor Armour. Now that we have a second layer of Retributor Armour down, our model should look something like this, bright and shiny all over with no gray patches showing through. The next paint that we're going to be applying is our Rhinox Hide. This is going to be painted everywhere on the base to distinguish it from the rest of the model. If you've seen my Night Haunt video, you know that I'm not a big fan of doing this, since I think it really underutilizes all of the nice details sculpted into these bases. I'm going to be following the instructions on the box here, but at the end of the video we'll discuss some alternatives for how to do these bases. You should pause the video now and paint the Rhinox Hide on your model. Here we have the model after letting the Rhinox Hide dry. Next we're going to be painting all of the black details on the model. This includes things like the gaps between the various armor plates, the tassels, and the belts on the model. It is common for non-Stormcast models, when painting shields, to paint the inside of them black also. The instructions don't explicitly tell you to do it here, but it's definitely an option that's open to you. The instructions here have the vambraces, the forearm guards, painted black, which I honestly think looks a bit weird. Instead, so I get a little bit more black on the model, I painted the fingers on the hand so that you can envision that they're wearing a layer of black under their armor and that the fingers are showing through from the plates. In the end, the exact placement of the black, like any color when you're painting, is up to you. I recommend having a concept of what each color represents on the model and being consistent about that in where you apply it. You should pause the video now and go paint the Abbadon Black on your model. Here's my version of the model after I've let the Abbadon Black dry. Now we're going to be applying the Kantor Blue to the model, which is going to define our secondary color, contrasting with the yellow of the gold. This is going to be painted on the pauldrons on the shoulders, around the skirt of the figure, and on the leaves on the base to pick them out a little bit. If you're painting the figure with a shield, this will also go on the front of the shield and be potentially on the trim on the back if you decide to put it there. I'll give you a moment to pause the video and apply this paint to your model yourself. After letting the Kantor Blue dry, you can see we're starting to get a good contrast between our two colors that dominate the model. One of the problems, though, is with basing everything out using our gold color, is that the thinner parts on the blue have picked up a bit of a greenish hue to them. The way that we're going to be fixing this is by applying a second layer of Kantor Blue to the model, and just kind of like we did with the base undercoat, just making sure that we have good coverage everywhere that we want to have blue. Now you can take a moment to touch up any thin areas on your model using our Kantor Blue. After letting this second layer of Kantor Blue dry, we should have a nice clean, strong blue on our model. Now we're going to apply some Rakarth Flesh to the model. This color is going to be applied to all of the cloth portions of the model. If you have a shield with a scroll on it, this is going to be applied to any of the scroll work that appears on your shield too. If you're feeling fancy, you can pick out any lightning bolts on the model using this paint, since this is our closest to white that we're going to have. The instructions also have you using the Rakarth Flesh on the grips of the maces. You could also use Rhinox Hide on the grips, though using the shade on the Rakarth Flesh will give it a nice kind of light leather look. Now I'll let you pause the video and go paint some Rakarth Flesh on your model. This is what our model looks like with the Rakarth Flesh applied. This is our last basing layer, so we should make sure that we've cleaned up any mistakes on the model before we proceed any further. Once we have finished our base layers, the next thing to do is to shade the model. This involves covering the entire model with Reikland Fleshshade to darken the recesses and pull out some of the details. For some colors, like the Abbadon Black, this isn't really necessary, since all it's going to do is make it a little bit glossy if we apply the shade to it. Now you can pause the video and go shade your model. Make sure to give the paint enough time to dry before you proceed, because you'll start lifting it up otherwise. Once we have allowed the shade to dry, we should have a model that looks something like this. According to the instructions, this is our completed model. This, I think, is a decent first model, but I think there's a few things, given what we've been provided with in the kit, that we can do to improve it still. The first thing that I'm doing is going to improve the entire model is highlighting the metal a bit. Specifically, I'm going to get a bit of Retributor gold on the brush and use the side of it to brighten up the edges of any of the gold plates, to simulate the metal glinting in the sun. If the shade pooled on you anywhere, so that you have dark patches on the flat portions of the armor, you can also use a bit of gold at this point to brighten those areas up if they don't look right to you. The next bit of work that I did was using the Kantor Blue. Again, I'm working on highlighting all of the raised bits of blue on the shoulders and on the skirt. I'm doing this to punch up the contrast between the darkest areas of blue and the brightest, since the shading that we've done has darkened everything down a bit. This additional contrast will make the model read better at a distance on a game table. For the cloth sections, I'm doing an edge highlight of the raised regions using Rakarth Flesh, and then for things like lightning bolts and such, I'm doing a broad flat highlight, basically kind of trying to get them as white as possible. If you've used Rakarth Flesh for the mace grip, I would recommend against highlighting with it, since that's going to make the grip look a lot less like leather. So after going and doing all this detail work, this is what my model looks like. As I mentioned while we were working earlier, that there's some of the color choices and the instructions that I disagreed with. What I'm going to show you next is an alternative version of our Stormcast model that I did using the kit, but using paint selections that I think were more appropriate. So for this model, I did the majority of the main model in the same way as the kit. The two major changes that I made are with the inside of the skirt and how I undercoated the model. As you can see clearly here, I've differentiated between the inside and outside of the skirt by painting our cloth color on the inside. To do this easily and effectively, you realistically need to paint the inside of the skirt before assembling the model, though in theory you can do it afterwards, but it's really finicky. This extra bit of complexity is why I didn't really suggest doing it when we were discussing the original tutorial. This is more of an intermediate technique. The other change that I did was using a different undercoat for the model. Instead of basing out using Retributor Armour, I instead based out using Abbadon Black. This has a number of effects on our paint job. First, the gold is going to be a touch darker since a little bit of the undercoat leaks through, and generally I feel it reads a little bit richer, and like you get a bit more of the contrast between the highlighting and the dark recesses. It also avoids the issues that I was having with the overly thin Kantor Blue coming out a touch greenish. Instead, I was able to use thin layers of paint to kind of build up some shading by having where it was thinner being a bit darker from the black. I leaned into this previously in my Intercessors video, which you can go watch if you want to see a little bit more of a technical of how I actually executed this. To be clear, I don't think what the instructions in the kit said to do are wrong per se. It's just merely as a painter or an artist in this, I have the creative discretion of choosing how I would like to paint the model, and there's definitely things with this kit specifically that I would have painted differently. So that concludes the tutorial. We have our completed model. So what are our next steps? As a beginning painter, I would recommend completing the other two models in this kit. That's because a large amount of the skills that you need to develop, especially early on as a miniature painter, just require a certain amount of raw on brush on model time, just physically doing the activity to develop things like fine motor control. You'll find as you work through these three models, with each one you're going to get progressively better. Beyond that, depending on what you want to do, if you're really into Age of Sigmar and you're really into Stormcast, then you're probably going to start looking at getting Soul Wars or one of the other box sets that has like the rules and things like that and some more Stormcast models. If you're still not 100% sold on exactly what game you want to play, but you know you want to play something Games Workshop, there's the Night Hunt box, or kit like this, that's a good introduction, which I have a video on. Or if you're more thinking that you want to do 40k, there's the Space Marine and the Death Guard boxes in this set that you could also do as beginnings. If you're looking at a different painting style, Reaper has their Learn to Paint kits, which at some point in the future I'll do some videos on, but those I know are a good starting point. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I put out a variety of tutorial videos and things about Blood Bowl. I also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/sleepywhatsit. You can see what I'm working on, ask questions, generally hang out and have a chill time. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.